This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. You can visit their store by using my referral link in the description below. Hi everyone, I'm Nitsahone, and it's Friday, and that means it's time for another MTG Top 10, the series where I rank cards based on their historical performance at Magic's highest level of competition. At least, that's normally what I do in this series. From time to time, I like to look at the other end of the spectrum and look at some of the worst cards ever, and that's what we're doing today with a look at the worst 10 dragons ever printed. I've looked at the best dragons in Magic twice, once in 2017 and again in 2020 when I updated the list, and unsurprisingly, those lists are pretty stacked. Dragons are big flying creatures that can breathe fire, so it's not too surprising that they tend to come with some pretty impressive cards. Wizards even classifies dragons as Red's iconic creature type, which means that they appear at higher rarity and are quite powerful, while also embodying the flavor of a particular color. That said, there are a lot of dragons, 240 of them in total, and when you have that many of anything, some of them are going to be real duds, and as we'll see, that's definitely the case here. This video actually originally started out as one that was going to look at the 10 worst creatures from all of the iconic creature types, which would have meant not only dragons were eligible for the video, but also sphinxes, demons, hydras, and angels. But as I was getting things together for that list, the dragons seemed way worse, so I decided to do one that looks at dragons alone. As is always the case with worst videos, the cards that appear on this list get there based on my opinion, but my opinion is informed some by data. There are two things that have to be true about a card for it to be considered. First, it can never have been in a deck that top-8'd a big Magic event, and second, it can't be widely played in EDH. I use EDHREC to help me research how widely played cards are in the format, since they have a database of around 200,000 EDH decks. Obviously enough, a card also has to have the dragon creature type to make it on this list. Alright, let's take a look at my picks for the 10 worst dragons ever printed in Magic. At number 10, I have Exalted Dragons, which is definitely the least bad of the dragons on this list. It's the only one on the list that actually starts with kind of respectable stats, as a 6-mana 5/5 flyer is actually an okay deal, but it does come with a doozy of a downside since it requires you to sacrifice a land when you attack with it. While it can potentially kill the opponent quickly, if it ends up not doing its job or your opponent can stop it from attacking or block it, you're going to end up crippling your entire mana base, and it isn't like it's that hard to deal with this. At number 9, I have Lotus Guardian. It may not say dragon on it, but it has received erratum for that creature type. If you watched my video on bad cards I thought were good when I was a kid, you know that this one made an appearance there. I thought this card was really cool, partly because it had great art, and partly because it had Lotus in the name, and I knew Black Lotus was the best card ever. But in actuality, this is a pretty bad card, as evidenced by the fact that it can be played in literally any EDH deck, but it only appears in 73 of around 200,000 on EDHREC. 7 mana for a 4/4 flyer is terrible, and while it's nice it has the upside of tapping for mana of any color, by the time you cast this expensive, inefficient creature, you don't really need the mana. At number 8, I have Via Shivan Dragon. This starts out as a 6 mana 4/4 flyer, which is a better rate than Lotus Guardian. Of course, you have to have double green and red to cast it, which isn't always the easiest thing to make happen, and going through the trouble of getting that kind of mana just for this creature isn't worth it. It does come with fire breathing and can raise its toughness, but this is still an overcosted and hard to cast creature. It's pretty funny to compare it to something like Shivan Dragon, which was monocolored and had significantly better starting stats too. At number 7, it's Brimstone Dragon. This thing is a whopping 8 mana, and if you're spending that much, the card you're playing better be incredible. A 6/6 with flying and haste doesn't really qualify. Sure, it can be a fast clock, but it's vulnerable to a ton of removal and doesn't leave any kind of value behind if it dies. In other words, it just doesn't have a big enough impact on the game for the massive amount of mana you're spending. It would need an Enter the Battlefield ability or a death trigger, or some way to prevent it from dying to be good, and it doesn't have any of those things. It's just a big, dumb creature that is very, very easy to kill. At number 6, I've got Cloud Dragon. It is actually the card in this list played the least in EDH, but I don't think it's actually the worst of the bunch, as evidenced by the fact that it's at number 6. Obviously, it's still pretty bad. It is 6 mana for a 5/4 with an ability Wizards R&D calls High Flying. In other words, it can only block other creatures with flying. So yeah, this is already a barely reasonably costed flyer, so coming with the downside of not being able to block ground creatures is a pretty big bummer. At number 5, I've included 2 dragons, Palladium Ores and Chromium. They're part of a famous cycle of Elder Dragons from Legends. While these cards are very important in the history of the game, they were after all the very first commanders, and that's where we get the Elder Dragon and Elder Dragon Highlander, but the cards in this cycle aren't very good, with the possible exception of the original Nico Bolas. Palladium Ores and Chromium, though, are the only 2 that I thought were bad enough to make the list. The whole cycle consists of very hard to cast dragons. They each cost 2 colorless mana and double mana of 3 different colors in a particular shard. That's a total of 8 mana. Then they require you to pay a tax of 1 of each of those mana every upkeep, or you sacrifice them. The others in this cycle do enough to make that extreme cost kind of worth it, but not these 2. Palladium Ores just has flying and trample, and Chromium brings flying and rampage too. Rampage is a super underwhelming mechanic that in this case means that if this creature is blocked by more than one thing, it gets +2/+2 for each blocker beyond the first. Chromium is already so big that it doesn't matter very much. So paying 8 mana for these 2 7/7 flyers with only very minor upside is a steep cost, and it also means that they aren't even that great to reanimate or anything like that. Even though the whole format of EDH was born partly as a result of these dragons, both Palladium Ores and Chromium are played as the commander in very few decks on EDH Rec, and they're only played slightly more in EDH decks with different commanders. At number 4, it's Firestorm Hellkite. It has a similar problem to the Elder Dragons, but I think it's worse, even if it is more efficiently costed and easier to cast up front. After all, it's a 6 mana 6/6 with flying and trample. But cumulative upkeep is a real killer, and that's what makes it similar to and worse than the Elder Dragons. The next upkeep after this has entered the battlefield, you have to pay a blue and a red. On the turn after that, you have to pay 2 blue and 2 red, and so on. At least with the Elder Dragons, once you have the mana you need to pay their upkeep costs, you're good, but you're going to pretty quickly run out of mana for Firestorm Hellkite's cost, and while the Hellkite is more efficient, it doesn't do enough to overcome the downside of cumulative upkeep. To keep this in play, you basically have to stop adding to the board at all, and that's brutal. One of the worst things that can happen with a cumulative upkeep creature like this is that you pay for its massive upkeep cost, and then your opponent just kills it at instant speed. So yeah, there's way too much downside here, even if it does have efficient stats up front. At number 3, I've got Tika's Dragon. This is another very overcosted dragon. It's 9 mana for a 5/5 flyer. A rate you should never pay unless a card has some impressive stuff going on in the text box, and Tika's Dragon definitely doesn't. It comes with Trample and Rampage 4. Unlike fellow Rampage Dragon Chromium, this dragon comes with Trample 2, which actually combines pretty well with Rampage, as double blocking Tika's Dragon can be pretty challenging. Combining it with lure effects is also kind of cool, but 9 mana is just so much, and a 9 mana creature needs to be game breaking, and Tika's Dragon doesn't even approach that. It takes a whole lot of work for it to actually be an impactful card, and most of the time it's just not going to do anything. At number 2, I've got Henge Guardian. When it was originally printed, it didn't have the dragon type, but it has since been errata to be a dragon worm, and boy, is it bad. It starts out as a 5 mana 3/4, an atrocious rate even back in the day. It can gain Trample, which is upside, but it isn't that impressive on a 3/4, especially when you have to pay 2 mana each turn to give it Trample in the first place. This gobbles up a lot of mana and doesn't give you a whole lot back. And at number 1, I've got Elder Landworm. Like Henge Guardian, it didn't have the dragon creature type originally, but it has it now, and it's also a dragon worm. It's pretty funny that the top 2 on this list have the same 2 creature types. Anyway, the Landworm starts out as a 7 mana 5/5 with Defender and Trample. That is a terrible card, but hey, it does get slightly better since once it blocks, it loses Defender. But that means this is a 7 mana 5/5 with Trample that you have to jump through hoops to fully unlock, and that's not a card you should ever be playing anywhere. Well, those are my picks for the worst dragons in the history of Magic. If you want to own any of these terrible cards, because, I don't know, maybe you want to build a cube of intentionally terrible cards to troll people, you can find direct Card Kingdom links for each of them in the description. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and share it so that others can enjoy it too. If you want to make sure you catch future episodes of this series and a whole bunch of additional MTG content, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. And if you want to catch up on past MTG top 10s, including more worst lists and more lists about creature types, you should see the playlist on your screen shortly. Lastly, if you want to go the extra mile in supporting the channel, you can on Patreon. Thanks for watching.